Ethiopia is one of the emerging economies on the continent, being ranked among those best performing around the world in emerging market that is. But the country is now asking international donors to offer aid promptly for relief operations to support 10.2 million people critically short of food, and said the country was committed to allocating as much of its own funds as necessary to this aid. Deputy Prime Minister Demeke Mekonnen was speaking beside UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon during a tour of an area where one of the worst droughts in decades has left children malnourished, killed livestock, and damaged livestock.
When a worsening drought threatened to wipe out Saido Kenyatt's entire livestock of 200 sheep and goats, 15 cattle, 8 camels and 7 donkeys, she set off walking with her brood in search of pasture and food. The 29-year-old mother and her 5 boys are among the 7,500 people who have flocked in the past 6 months to Fedeto, a remote outpost of 600 inhabitants in Ethiopia's Somali region, displaced from their villages due to hunger and loss of livestock.
I had 200 sheep and goats, 7 donkeys, 8 camels and 15 cattle when the drought started. We wandered through the desert from one village to another for 3 months, from Lababduin to reach here. All of my animals died one by one within this time, and I now have nothing except 2 donkeys.
Drought conditions triggered by El Nino phenomenon began in June 2015 in remote northeastern areas of the country, as well as many parts of Somalia and Somaliland, and have spread rapidly to the more populous highlands, leaving an estimated 10.1 million people in need of food aid. Ethiopia's Somali region, in particular Fedeto's city zone, are some of the hardest hit. The relief operation by the government, World Food Programme, and charities need $1.4 billion this year. The government says donors have covered about 30% so far. The WFP says $500 million is needed to continue operations beyond April.
Our government.
All right, so the crisis there is affecting not just Ethiopia, but also spreading to Mozambique. But let's bring in the Ethiopian Save the Children Country Director, John Graham, to look at some of the economic and human issues surrounding this story that we have. A good afternoon to you from Addis Ababa. We appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
We thank you very much for finding time. Bring us up to speed. You're the man on the ground. How serious is this? We've seen some pictures, some images there of families, livelihoods, livestock, and lives being threatened. But how severe is this on the ground, affecting not just these poor people, but spreading to affect the bigger Ethiopian economy?
Yeah, it's very serious. It's the largest drought we've seen in 50 years, mostly because there's been 3 rainfalls in different parts of the country, which have all failed, one on top of each other. The one you see in Fedeto and that part of Somali region and Afar region, those rains failed completely. The early Belg rains for cropping areas, they failed completely. And then the main rains, for which 90% of the cropping areas are dependent on, they were poor, not failed, but poor. In some areas they had crop failures. So you put all of these 3 together, and you've got a very serious meteorological crisis, the rainfall. But there's a big difference between now and the 1980s, and that's that Ethiopia has a good government that's actually ahead of the game, is identifying these needs and responding to them. You've got systems in place to be able to respond and get assistance to people quickly. The only difference is that this time we're trying to head off this crisis before we see children suffering. We're trying to get the assistance to them in the early stages. Now, when we can do that in most of the country, as long as we have the resources, but the international support has just not been enough so far.
But how much do you think, Graham, how much do you think will be needed?
Well, there's about $750 million that's needed overall to respond to the crisis in 2016 under the most optimistic of projections. That means that if all the rains come and there aren't any additional beneficiaries. So that's a lot of resources, but it's very small compared to the contributions that have happened to other emergencies.
Ethiopia is the home of the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa, the ECA, and others. Are they weighing in on this crisis? The AU summit just ended.
Yeah, no, the AU summit was a very good opportunity to talk to different actors, both in the African Union and in the, from donors, the Secretary General. I attended a meeting with the Secretary General and head of USAID, Vice President of the European Union on Sunday morning as a side session to speak specifically about the drought. And they immediately started talking about further commitments. The US government announced $97 million more on Sunday to contribute. So it was a very good opportunity to highlight the situation here and to get more assistance.
Let's wrap this on this note. Save the children in Ethiopia. What's your agency doing in this situation? How much help are you bringing to the table?
Our target is to raise $100 million to respond, and so far we're about 50% of the way there. We've been able to respond to malnutrition, severe malnutrition, to make sure that children who are malnourished are brought back to health. We've been able to respond to water and sanitation needs. We have a very large food program. We're now helping to feed 480,000 people in Ethiopia as part of our response. And we're also looking at seeds for farmers for the next rains, helping pastoralists to retain their breeding herds through fodder provision. So we're doing a wide variety of activities.
Okay, we thank you very much for your time today, and we'll keep you in the loop. Keep us also in the loop, John Graham. We appreciate your time as this story unfolds and solutions have been found. Save the Children, Ethiopia, John Graham, the country director. Now, a few countries just to the west of Ethiopia, you find another African country in the north this time, Tunisia. Residents of a town known as Al-Qalam in Kasserine, an impoverished town where protests began last week after a young man killed himself after apparently being refused a public sector job. Fear the poor living conditions will push the town's youths into militant extremism. They struggle to support their families. They wait for the government to introduce measures to cut down unemployment. This is a story you need to listen to.
Salha Talbi, a 38-year-old Kasserine resident and mother of 7 children, says her family collect plastic bottles and gravel along the valley next to their tin house in order to survive. Salha said that she feared poverty would lead unemployed young men towards militant extremism.
Our living conditions are very bad. I have 2 children with diplomas. I want the government to give them a job. We want them to help us improve our social situation, which is very bad. I want my children to live a good life like any other people. I don't want them to suffer or deviate and join terrorist groups or to steal or do bad things. I want them to get a job, not only my children, but all other unemployed young people. I'm afraid if a young man doesn't find a job, he would deviate to terrorism.
According to her, 2 of her sons are graduates, but they are unable to find jobs. Demonstrations began in Kasserine last week and have spread across the country, leading to violent protests and riots, the most serious since 2011 uprising that toppled autocrat Zain El Abidine Ben Ali. The rate of unemployment in Kasserine is 26%, while the national average is 15.3%. Asiya Nasrali, another woman who lives in the shanty town, said she had to give up her studies in order to meet her family's needs by collecting sand and gravel along the valley with her husband.
All the inhabitants here are poor. I have made many job applications, but no answer. I have a high school degree and I can do any kind of job for any company. My family is destroyed. We don't have anywhere to live or anything to eat. My neighbors buy diapers and milk for my baby.
Prime Minister Habib Assid said on Saturday that he understood the demands of the young Tunisians protesting, but that it will take time to respond to their demands. Tunisia has been held up as a model for democratic progress since the 2011 revolution, but there has been rising discontent over the lack of jobs and high living costs, especially in the country's interior. University graduates comprise 1/3 of jobless Tunisians after student numbers increased. These conditions are partly why Tunisians fear that even middle-class, educated people could fall prey to Islamist militant recruiters seeking jihadist fighters for their ranks in Syria, Iraq, and now Libya. Frustrations are most prevalent in poor urban districts of the capital and in the rural, marginalized communities where this week's protests erupted.
Nigeria's first initial public offer may be in the offing. We'll come back to that after the break. Stick around.